You do a lot of recordings otherwise on your.
Welcome everybody to the
Sorry.
Welcome everybody to the Yoga Center of Chap's Yoga Philosophy. I'm Lauren Carley, and we have with us today Tom Hess. In this series, we're studying the Bhagavad Gita and how it relates to your life. We use the translation by Economics as follows. You can use any translation you like. I'm honored to introduce our presenter for Chapter 2 and owner of the Yoga Center, Tom Hess.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Lauren. I'm happy to be here. So we're studying the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and the title of the chapter is called The Illumined Man. And this is really more than anything in this chapter. It's sort of a little bit of a synopsis of the whole book that's going to come after. It's a little like a little preview. And within that preview, there's this idea of Samkhya Yoga, Samkhya philosophy. It's one of the philosophical concepts of India, and yoga falls under this category. Okay, so that's sort of what the general overall sense of the chapter is going to be about. But here we are. We start back in chapter 2, where we ended in chapter 1, where Arjuna has laid down his bow and arrow in the middle of the battlefield, and he's in the middle of the battlefield with Krishna, and he's saying, I will not fight. I do not want to fight, because these people that are across the way from me that I'm going to fight are my cousins, my grandsire, my teachers. These are the people that he grew up with. So he doesn't really want to fight him. He thinks that that's very anti-family dharma. Remember the word dharma, this duty that one has in life? Well, there's a family dharma as well. So this idea of fighting his kith and kin is against this idea that he has about fighting. And so he's in such despair. He's like tears of pity. He's confused. He doesn't know what to do. And so at this time of utter confusion in life, he turns to Krishna, his charioteer, and says, Krishna, I need a guide. I need a teacher. I need a guru. And this simple declaration by Arjuna is important because it signifies to him that he's in despair, that he needs help. And Krishna is there as his helper to help him, guide him through some of this ideas or acts that he's about to do. If we look at it from a deeper philosophical level, though, Krishna represents the Atman within Arjuna, the higher self within him. And this is Krishna's role, is to guide Arjuna towards the higher self within himself, his Atman. Arjuna feels like everything he does in life will be worthless if he kills his kin, if he has this fight with his family. So he's still in this despair, but he's looked at Krishna and says, Krishna, please help, please help. So Krishna is, of course, the wise one in this whole scenario, the sage, and he's sort of smiling under his breath and saying, Arjuna, don't worry about it. Life is eternal. This confusion you have about what's important and what's not important leads you to this angst and anxiety that you're experiencing. And you have to know that really there is no cause for your sorrow because life is eternal. You need to ignore the changing fluctuations of life because they are temporary. According to yoga philosophy and Samkhya philosophy, the only real things in life are the things that don't change. Everything that changes it's real, but it's temporary. It only has a finite amount of existence. So anything that is impermanent has no really reality. Reality only lies in the eternal. Those of us, not us, those who do see this reality that's where the wisdom, that's where this wisdom comes from. When you start to look at the world in the way it is, when we don't look at the world through the lens of our ego, for our attachments, the things we don't want to experience in life, the things we do want to experience, all these things get in the way of us experiencing or being in reality. Okay, these aversions, these attractions. Okay, Krishna goes on to define reality. It is that which is eternal. Okay, in the big picture, remember the word Purusha? We started it the first week. Purusha is this concept of the universal, the energetic universal form that everybody is a part of, and it's just the unmanifest form of energy within the world. Okay, that's the big picture. Then he starts to define, or Krishna defines to Arjuna what the self is, because there's always this reference to the inner self, the big S self within us. And this is the representation of the Atman, or Krishna inside of Arjuna might be represented as this big self. So what is the self? What is this person in it? Well, what are its qualities? Well, it cannot be hurt by any weapons. Water cannot wet it. It can't be affected by any wounds. It can't be burned or cut. It's not affected by the wind. It's everlasting and infinite, and it's unmanifested. So the self that lives within us, that is the thing that goes on in every lifetime, has all of these qualities. It's unmanifest, can't be hurt, can't be destroyed. It's beyond thought, it's beyond change, it's constant. So that's the big self within us. But then for the body, Krishna is telling Arjuna, why worried about all of this? Because the body is temporary anyway. It is inevitable. Anything in the earth that's born will die. It's the way of it. So that qualifies as impermanent. Therefore, the body somewhat qualifies as not real under this definition. So it does not matter then if you kill or others kill you, because it's inevitable anyway. So that's another reason that Krishna tells Arjuna that he should fight. It's inevitable. So you have a new body. Why lament? You die, you get killed in battle, you get reborn. Why lament? It's the natural cycle of this idea of Samkhya philosophy and Krishna's teachings to Arjuna. The self can never die. Then Arjuna goes back to Krishna and he says, Krishna goes to Arjuna and says, hey, and aside from all of this, it's your dharma, it's your job. You're a warrior. You should be in war. This is the purpose in life. So you as a warrior who are fulfilling your dharma, you are then not committing a sin. You are in fact, under these circumstances, would go to heaven because you fulfilled your dharma. And therein is that idea that you should go ahead and fight because it's your dharmic duty, it's your purpose. And then Krishna tells Arjuna, and what if you didn't fight? All of your family members, all of your friends, everybody would look down upon you because you're dishonorable, because you're not following your dharmic path of warriorhood. So it's like the dishonoring idea in this whole thing is huge for a warrior. Their egos are big. This dishonorable thing would really crush one's ego. Yet another reason to fight, to overcome this. But now Krishna tells Arjuna, because he has an understanding of the self, because he knows what the self is, that he has this knowledge, so why not go ahead and fight? Because you'll be free of sin, because it's your dharmic duty. You won't be doing anything wrong because you are too attached to the ego self, the outer self, and not recognize the inner self within the soul. And then Krishna tells Arjuna that he can win in this whole thing, even in death, because he will go to heaven because he's fulfilled his dharma. Okay, so this is where they're at right now. And so this is the point in time where Krishna in the chapter starts to talk about the spiritual practices and ideas and definitions that need to be looked at as his lesson to us. Every effort we make towards this yogic goal, and there's going to be a number of definitions of yoga that he says in a little while, every effort towards this yogic goal will be rewarded. So anything you do along this path of yoga is beneficial to you. There is no beneficial to you in the next life, So nothing that you do is going to be negative along this yoga path is negatively influenced you at all. Those who follow this path, the singleness of purpose, they have an easier way of it because they don't have so many conflicts in their life. There's a single focus, you stick to it, everything else is of lesser importance. You just stick to your path. And this is the path of the yoga practitioner, the spiritual practitioner. Then Krishna goes on to describe people who are sort of like who say they're spiritual teachers and who talk and say this is the way and this is the way, but in the end they're just feeding their own egos for their own purposes of power or want followers. You know, they want that recognition. This is why detachment is so important. You want to detach from the things that sort of attract you out of yourself and detach yourself from the pains of life. Because the attractions and the aversions in life are inevitable. They are inevitable. So why not just let them flow through you, not be so disturbed by them? That makes the decisions in life going forward much easier. Then Krishna goes into teaching Arjuna about the three gunas, right? Remember the three gunas from the first session where we were looking at definitions, tamas, rajas, and sattva. And then Krishna tells Arjuna that, hey, in this spiritual evolution, you even want to go beyond the gunas. You want to be acting from a place where you're not influenced by these elements of nature. You're looking to work in the world through the real self, not the elements of nature. You should be this person who is a spiritual seeker, should be established in truth, self-control with no desire to acquire or hoard things. Even somebody who is studying the scriptures, one needs to recognize that the scriptures are just a tool to get one to the experience. One that has the experience of this unity, this realization of self, the scriptures aren't that important because the experience is more important than the learning of it, the intellectual aspect of it. But you have to go through the scriptures like we are now, like this whole thing is about. We have to go through the scriptures to learn what we practice. Okay. Then Krishna goes into one of the main points of the Gita is that you should do your work in the world. Everybody should do their dharma, their work, their purpose in the world, but not be attached to the results. Because the results are part of that pain-pleasure thing. We're attached to something, and that influences how we act. If we are not attached to the result of our actions, these actions then have no influence on us going forward. So, do the work of the world. Do the work the best you can in the world. But at the end of it, you have to let it go because it won't serve you any further. Then he starts to talk about some yogic definitions. Yoga is perfect evenness of mind. So if you have less distractions in the mind where you're not attached to these other things, it's easier to stay single focused. Okay. True wealth in the world comes from the spiritual awareness, the spiritual understanding that I am not my real self. My real self is an unmanifest entity within myself that has a connection to the greater world. That's who I truly am. When you start to get this unified consciousness, the vanity and the resulting anxiety around vanity are gone because I'm not so worried about my self-image. So I got an easier time to focus the mind on the things. Okay. The wise unify the consciousness and detach from the fruits of actions. And once one gets to the point of not being attached to the actions of the world, not being engaged in this continual repetition of creating karma, then at some point when spiritual awareness comes, they're not so subject to these laws of cause and effect and karma and so forth. Now, to follow along with this, another definition that Krishna has of yoga is skill in action. So this means that you do your work in the most skillful way you can. It has to be skillful for it to be yoga, but then give it up because you've done the best you can. There's nothing you can do at that point. So yoga is skill in action, according to the Gita. That confusion then is overcome. Indifference will come and no distraction will change the mind when you're in this yogic state of mind. You're single focused. Then Krishna goes on to explain to Arjuna, who is this person, this sage, this person of wisdom? What do they look like? What do they act like? Well, he defines that. A person who's a sage sees themselves and all around. They see that they are part of this greater community, this greater world, this greater energetic form, and they're a part of it. They're not separate. They have renounced selfish desire and selfish cravings. They're not tied into those attachments. They're not agitated by sorrow or necessarily desiring of pleasure. They sort of have to, those things happen, no doubt, but they don't let them influence them so very much. They control the senses. The wise are able to control their senses so that we're not so reactionary, that we're not so influenced by the things of the world that are ever changing, and we're more steadfast in our stance and our goals. Okay, but even anywhere along this path, these senses can come and derail you. So you have to be really sharp about it and consistent. Okay, when you're attached to something that breeds desire, and this desire of these things is sort of a lusty feeling, and this lust feeling leads to a little bit of anger within us, and then this anger, just a little bit, we start to lose our discernment. So our decision-making processes are gone when we start to get too attached to the things of the world. Okay, and so Krishna urges Arjuna to free himself from these attachments and aversions alike and live in the true self. Then Krishna says this a couple of times in the text, that the true spiritual seeker is quite different than your average person. They see the world in day as the average person sees the world in night, or vice versa. It's quite a contrary view of the world, the non-wise and the wise. So he does mention that a couple of times. Contentment, this yogic state of mind, occurs when the wise, the sage, allows these senses to just flow through them without disturbance. Those who renounce all selfish desires and break away from the ego self. Okay, the ego self is the one that's attached. Okay, once you break away from that, you then become united with the Lord within, and will attain the supreme state and pass from death to immortality. And there's Krishna's lesson to Arjuna in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So there it is. Thank you. Take care. I did it.
Thanks, Tom. Now with that, we're going to talk about, talk about 4 recommended or suggested practices that you might one will step up and work on it. What those 4 sections summarize, Krishna says throughout this chapter in a lot of different ways, fight that war within. Practically every section, he's saying in a different way. But in those 4, what I like about them, he's particularly saying is unify the consciousness and drop the attachment. It's all order. But let's look at some practices on how to do that. You just recommended there's a million different practices out there, and Tom may have some others to add. The first one you might want to play with or try is start some ujjayi breathing. If you don't know what that is, at the end of this, I will reference how to get a hold of it since you're watching this video. So start some ujjayi breathing, and as you follow your exhale, of course, to stillness. You're following your exhale, not forcing it. And when you reach the bottom of the exhale, notice with your higher consciousness that you are finally completely still. So even if your body's still and you're breathing, you're still living in a dual world. In breathing in and breathing out, breathing versus not breathing, and so on. So there's a little opportunity to experience a taste of this non-dual world through ujjayi breathing. The second one is, now this is an active practice. See, pick an asana, any asana. Pick the one you like to do, and practice this about 5 or 8 different ways. Let your focus, your consciousness on the details of your practice and the practice of the particular asana. And start listening to what is going on in your mind. Start listening to that dialogue and ask yourself, who's speaking? Is it my ego that's speaking, or is it my higher self speaking? Of course, that's the path on, or the higher capital S self. And use that feedback between what's going on here, the dialogue that you're hearing now, consciously, and what your body is telling your mind. And start zeroing in on that. And the easiest way to do it is practice a particular asana, simpler the better, in my personal opinion. 5, 6, 8, 9 times. Not different ways. The third practice. Desensitize yourself to a trigger. Let me give an example to explain that. If you walk into your kitchen and somebody left a donut on your counter, and you think, let's carve that donut down. And you do without really thinking about it. Stop and ask yourself, who told you? What did you hear? Why did you do that? Start questioning yourself. That donut was a trigger. The trigger could be anything that makes you act in an unconscious manner. And then you can rewind the tape, so to speak, in your head and say, well, now, next time I walk in the kitchen, that donut's still there, and maybe put a donut there. See if you can walk past it and not let it bother you. And start, again, listening to the dialogue that's going on in your head. And once you do this over and over again, just like with practicing a particular asana, you're desensitizing yourself to that trigger. In other words, you're smoothing out and getting control over the fluctuations in your mind, over the situations in your life that are bouncing you from left to right, from black to white, from this to that. It's that dualistic world that we live in that can drive us crazy. And what I'm suggesting is to start paying attention to it, start focusing your consciousness on it so you can get on top of it and let your higher consciousness take yourself start playing a role in what you do in everyday life. Okay, the last one I have, because this chapter of the Gita ends with it's 2.71, it's the mention of the ego, and Krishna telling you to be free from your ego. To better understand the role of ego, what I recommend is look up the behavior chain. And if you Google behavior change, you're going to find, I think it was 5 or 8 I counted what I did the other day, different versions of it. Look at the behavior chain where the trigger triggers a thought. The dialogue is an actual dialogue in your head. The thought triggers an emotion. The emotion triggers an action. Gita, donut, Vipassana. And the action, of course, ends up resolving consciousness. So a way to detach from that ego-driven life that we can believe is raise the level of consciousness so that now you have a choice. And the behavior change is just a model to better understand how these things happen, because it happens in a split second. And one of the things we try to slow down that behavior change, slow down why it is that we do something so that you can feel the fluctuations in your mind. So there's 4 practices to consider or not consider that get at what this chapter is all about. Unifying your consciousness and detaching from the duality of the world. If you are watching this as a video on YouTube and you want to get a hold of it, you can get a hold of it, Tom or I, through the Yoga Center of Chico. It's online, they have a website, and you can contact through there. And that way, through that contact, you can get some of the outline for this series, and you can get more information behind what's going on with this yoga philosophy series, but in this case, this time the philosophy. So Tom, any closing remarks?
No, Lauren, that was great. Thank you. The only other thing that I might suggest as a practice method is observing the right and left side of the body in the asana and trying to come to a unity around that. So this is something in my classes we do every day. You compare the right and left side of the body and you try to bring balance, just like you do to the mind. And those practices that Lauren gave you are perfect ways for you to do that. Anyway, thanks a lot for joining us. Please join us in the future. We're going to keep going on through the sutra, through the Gita, and then we'll probably keep going on after that. So thanks a lot. Namaste.